You're just pumped to learn about sending email? There you are.
So question for you regarding send emails.
Yeah.
We have that forgot password thing that comes with the app.
Yeah.
So when we tried doing that, it didn't send us anything.
Yeah.
Is that because we're on the local server and not on the thingy, or because we don't have the email server?
It will be because you don't have a mail server running on your local machine. And there is one thing you need to do on Devise, which the initializer tells you to do, which is set who the email is coming from on it. But the main reason why it's not working is because we haven't set up any mail settings, and you don't have a mail server running. So you're going to learn that today. So it's all setting up SMTP, which is what, simple mail transfer. I think it's simple mail transfer protocol. So it's setting up SMTP configuration to connect to some sort of running mail server, which you can run locally. It's not usually worth it to run your own local one. You can do it through Gmail if you want to. I'm going to teach you how to do it through a service called Mandrill. It's not super sharp, is it? So yeah, it'll just be because you didn't have it set up. So yeah, you're going to learn a few things. Sending your own custom emails. I mean, obviously there's the Devise one, and you can customize that one too. So sending your own emails, you know, things like newsletters or notifications, weekly digests, all that kind of stuff you can do with this. And then the configuration of it so that, you know, when you push it out to Heroku, all that kind of stuff, it'll also actually send emails. And then we're going to learn, if we have time, the idea of, so the process of sending an email actually takes a long time, like a few seconds from the perspective of your app, which isn't, you know, a long time in the grand scheme of things, but that's a few seconds per email that you send, and if you're sending it to like 1,000 people, each with a customized email address, that's 3 times 1,000 seconds of time that it would take. So it's the type of thing you want to do in the background, and I'm going to teach you about background jobs, and it would also be useful for anyone who wanted to do, say, a CSV upload and then process this data. You wouldn't want to have to process that data in line with the same request as the person that uploaded it. You'd want to just respond to them and say, you know, we're working on it, kind of thing. And then, so that'll be the second part of this, is doing things in the background. Yeah. So on that note, we can just get to it. I don't think it's going to take too long, hopefully. There isn't an existing app that really even matters or makes sense to do these examples with, so I just thought we'd walk through a brand new one together, if that works for you guys. So just make sure you're on the latest Rails, Rails 4.1. If not, you can gem install Rails, as I just did here. And we'll just make a new app. So I'm just going to call mine mailer example. So Rails uses a library called Action Mailer for sending emails. It's like Action Controller, which is what your controllers are inheriting from this Action Controller library. So Action Mailer is just another library that Rails has written for you that can send out emails. The basics of these two libraries, controller and mailers, are actually very similar. They do similar things. So they will take a bunch of content, turn it into text or HTML, and then either send it to the browser or send it to an email. So under the hood, they're actually kind of similar. It's just that controllers take a request in and then respond with something. Mailers don't take a request in, but they still take all that content and then send it somewhere. So a lot of the functionality that is in those two libraries is shared amongst those things. And that's just like sort of, you know, a tenet of object-oriented programming. You describe these behaviors and you can share them amongst different classes and stuff like that. So just so you know, we're not going to dive into the internals, but under the hood, Action mailers and action controllers both get functionality from one place called an abstract controller. When you get deeper into object-oriented programming, you'll learn about abstract classes, but you don't need to know about that right now. So for a mailer, all you need to know is who are you going to send the mail to, what content do you want to send them. That will in turn allow you to write the views for that content, and then you basically just instantiate this class and call deliver on it. And that's it. It's super easy, like most things in Rails. So let's just dive in. Actually, ignore that line. So make your new Rails app, and we'll start with this one, generating new mailer. So we're going to make a user mailer just because a user object is something that we have in most of our apps. It doesn't have to, the name of it doesn't matter. I'm just calling it a user mailer because it's emails that we're sending to a user. So let me go into the folder. And Rails G mailer, user mailer, and this argument I'm giving it is the email that we're going to be sending it. So I'm just using an example of a newsletter. So you can picture like a blog or something like that. Might send out a weekly or a monthly newsletter, that sort of thing. Okay, so user mailer once again generates a bunch of stuff, gives you some views, gives you some tests. We went over testing last week, so if you guys care to test your mailers, there's a whole guide on it in the Action Mailer, the Rails guidebook, so you can read about the ways that you might test your mail classes. I mean, even at Influitive, we don't often test our emails that we send out, so it's very much up to you if you want to do that. So let's take a look at the things that it generated for us. So we're going to go into, sorry, I'll just open this up. And close down this stuff. So if we go into app, mailers, user mailer, you'll notice it has generated this content for us. And then if you go into views, user mailer, you'll see these two different auto-generated views that we have here. The two different views are for two different formats that you can send. So in email, you know how oftentimes you'll, like if you're sending an email to a buddy of yours, you're just sending a text-based email, there's nothing fancy in it, but lots of marketing emails and stuff, or any, Facebook, all that kind of stuff, they are actually sending you HTML emails. Typically, those emails are actually multi-part, so they'll have HTML in it, and then they'll have a backup of text. So for anyone who's on, say, an older computer that somehow doesn't render HTML, it'll actually give you a text version as well. It's considered best practice to do that. So generally, if you're writing an HTML email, you also want to have a text-based version.
So I didn't actually get any email.
You got only a text when you did Rails G user mailer? What version of Rails? That shouldn't even matter. I mean, it's been around for a while. What's your user mailer look like? Does it look roughly like this? Doesn't really matter. I mean, I don't know why that happened, but all you actually need is a file called newsletteremail.html.erb. The contents in it right now are not all that interesting anyway, so I wouldn't. Yeah, just make one. I don't know why that happened. The rest of you guys though got HTML and text. Yeah, weird. Very odd. Okay, so these are the basics of an email. You can see it's actually kind of similar to a controller, but with a few extra options. So this isn't really RESTful in any way. There's no like create, read, update, delete, all that kind of stuff. We just call it whatever the hell we want to call it. But any instance variables that we assign in our mailer itself are going to be available in our view. So this is Rails just giving us an example of using an instance variable in the mailer and then getting in the view. This is obviously a stupid example because hi would just easily go into your view. But I'll show you a better example. So one kind of problem with this newsletter email right now, well, can anyone see one problem with this newsletter email right now? It's sending it to tuitexample.org, and it's not really the problem that it's sending it to Tuit, it's that it's hard-coded, right? So clearly when you send out emails, you don't always want to send it to one email address. So a better way of doing this actually would be to take in the, you could take in the email address if you wanted to, but more typically you'd actually take in the user model that you want to send it to. Because that'll have other information on it like name and all that kind of stuff. So you could, send an email saying like, hey, John, here's some information about you. And this newsletter email might actually be customized to that person. So it might say, here's the latest activity that you did, or like Facebook says, here's some, or Twitter says, here's some new tweets for you. It's obviously customized to you, right? It's not just, they don't send it to everyone, because everyone has different tweets. So very typically, you would actually pass in a user object here, and then you can replace this with just user.email. The other thing we can add on to this mail method here is a subject. So we can, again, customize this if we want. Whatever you want to put in there. And then I might actually just get rid of this greeting. It's kind of stupid. They're just using it as the example. But if you want this to be, if you want the user to be available in the view, then you can assign, you can just assign it through the instance variable user. I'm also going to delete this comment because it doesn't mean anything. And you can also make your default from if you want. So I'm just going to, that just, it doesn't really matter. I don't know if you knew this, but when you send an email, you can change like what a from looks like. It doesn't really care that much, so you can put that, just make it whatever you want. And for simplicity's sake, we're going to make a user model just so we can actually pass a user into here. And we're also going to make a post model. And so we're pretending this is a blog that we're writing, and we're going to be sending out, a few posts to people. So let's just do some of the boring stuff of scaffolding. Pardon me? Do I want a reference to? No, I'm not. It's not even a no. We're just imagining that a user is a subscriber to our blog, and the blog is me. I'm the blogger. So there's no association. This is really just for illustrative purposes. It doesn't, just so we have a few models that we can send in there. So after generating those, we can rake db migrate. Oh, I skipped over my hilarious joke. We're writing Bob Loblaw's Loblog. I don't know if is anyone an Arrested Development fan? Oh, man, you guys are missing out. You need to go watch Arrested Development, and then you'll understand what Bob Loblaw's Loblog is. So we are writing a Loblog right now. Okay, so we've got users and posts, and we migrated our database. And let's just actually populate that a little bit in just using our Rails console. So I'm going to make a user. I'm going to give it a name of Tobias, who loves blah, blah, blah. Tobias at mk.com. And let's create a few posts here as well. So post has a title of whatever, and a body of, and I'm just going to be clever here and say something like cool blog, this is going to make it more difficult, times 300, close, yeah. All right, so this is just the body of the blog. I'm sure you can come up with something a little more creative than what I did, but we'll do a few of them. Actually, for the lazy ones out there, you can do this. And body will have, why is it doing that? Oh, wait, did that work? No, it didn't work. No. I'm stuck in an infinite loop. All right. My console is hating me right now. What did I do wrong? 3 at a time. Post.create. Oh. Forgot to do that. Oh, but my body is empty. Oh, no, it isn't. No, it's empty in this case. Sorry, this is annoying. No, that one's fine. Okay, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so we have some posts and we have a user in our system. So what we're going to do, as I mentioned before, is we're passing our user in. We're also going to just get the latest 3 posts from our system. So both of these instance variables will be available to our views that we generate. And let's go over to our view itself, and we'll just create a title here, blah, 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 blah. And we will just iterate over them. And we're basically going to say something like post.title and post.body. And one thing you can do, just out of interest sake, and you can do this in your app anywhere, is there is a method, a view method in Ruby called truncate, and it'll allow you to actually specify a maximum length. So, especially in an email, you probably wouldn't have the whole blog in an email, but you could truncate the text of that thing to certain number of characters, and it'll just end it with a ... afterwards. You might have a link that says, read more or something like that. You can link to it, all that kind of stuff. So that's roughly what our view will look like. Let you guys catch up on that one. And I'm going to modify the text one as well. Sorry. Just to say, just to remove this greeting instance variable. We don't care about the text people. If you don't have a mail client that renders HTML in the year 2014, then it shouldn't be on a computer. But just make sure you do remove. It'll crash otherwise if you don't remove that that greeting instance variable, or it'll be no. It won't crash. Is everyone roughly this far? You've got the notes in front of you anyway, right? If you need to catch up. So let's go into, I'm just going to reload this console just so we make sure we have the latest stuff. Grab our Tobias user, and all you have to do in order to send out an email is call the class name dot the method name, pass in the argument that you're interested in, and call .deliver on it. So in our case, we're looking at a user mailer. So user mailer has a method newsletter email, and we're passing in that user. I'm calling deliver. Do any keen observers notice something weird about what we're doing here? If you look at this class definition of user mail, buy a coffee to anyone who can point out what is weird that is not NRIC. The way we're what? Nope, that's pretty normal. So what type of method is this? Okay, you don't get a coffee anymore since I'm giving you a quick. What type of method is this? Right. So what type of method is this then? It's an instance method. Yeah. So normally this would be available to instances of the user mailer class. Now, if you look at how we're using it in our console, we're not calling it on an instance, we're calling it on the class. So how does that work? That's weird, right? If you just write your, so if we just look at a normal class, class X, and I say def blah, I can't call x.blah, right? I can only call x.new.blah because I defined an instance method here. Action Mailer does something stupid, and I don't know why. It's a weird interface, but they have decided that you can just define instance methods, and it will turn it into a class method. So it masks that behavior from you, which is, in my opinion, kind of stupid because people are you're not gonna inherently look at that file and think, oh, I can just call usermailer.newslet. Like, they're not showing the intent of this class to me. I think it's a stupid interface, but anyway, that's how. I don't know what happens if you call. It expects something. Yeah, no, you can't even call new. They actually said, screw you guys. You're not allowed to instantiate your own instances of this thing because they've privatized the new method. So I think that's a mistake, but that's just my personal opinion. Anyway, suffice it to say, you have this weird way of calling this thing that that we're going to be sending. So you do call it as if it were a class method, and then you call .deliver. So when we do that, notice that we get this whole message here. So sent mail to Tobias Finke. Gives you a message ID. This is an SMTP format, by the way, like what we're actually seeing here. So if you go into Gmail or any of your mailers, and in Gmail anyway, when you click on the drop-down of a message, you can say view raw, I think it is, or raw message or something like that. You'll see exactly this. So this is like an SMTP mail format. It has these headers, basically, content types, all that kind of stuff, and then it defines, well, for multi-part emails anyway, it defines these different parts. So this one, this MIME type is the text plain one, and you'll see that it's just what we put in here. And then this second part is the text HTML, and it has real HTML in it. And notice that we have post 0, that was the one that I screwed up the body of. We have post 1, and then we have post 2. Unfortunately, none of those posts had enough text to illustrate the truncate method. But if you did one that had over 200 characters, you would see a ... in there. I'm sure you can figure that out. And then ultimately what's returned to us is this mail message, an instance of this mail message class. So you get this object back if you ever want to do anything with it. Generally, you don't. So everyone check their email and see if they got anything. Well, Tobias@finke.com will have to check his email. I don't know, it's probably better if you actually put in your own email address so you can test it. But you won't get anything. It's not going to work. So Horace was asking a good question. He said, you can do the sign-up email with Devise. That's one of the options. I think it's called Confirmable. It lets you confirm your email address by email, and that's that whole make sure you are who you say you are when you sign up thing. So in order for that to actually work, you need to connect your Rails mailer to a real SMTP server. And by default, you're not running an SMTP server locally, nor do you really want to. You can actually, you just don't want to become a spam machine and for any reason. So if you're ever thinking, hey, I'm going to spin up my own EC2 server and run a mail server, just use one of the services that cost you pennies, and it'll save you lots of time. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to use you configure these SMTP settings. So Action Mailer, SMTP settings, all that kind of stuff. And this, you can basically copy and paste it. You don't need to know precisely what it does or all the nitty-gritty of all that kind of stuff. But if you go into config application.rb, you want it inside of the application class. This is sort of like a global application-wide config file where you can put in things that apply to your whole application. So in this case, our mail settings do apply to our whole application. So I'm actually going to give you a username and a password that you can use. So you can just replace these nvars. I think I already did give it to you actually on the Basecamp site. I thought I would try to be clever and pretend that, oh no, I didn't do it. Oh no, that was tonight's message. Today's message. It's going to be, yeah, I was going to be all clever and just clone the project and have it all hidden and stuff like that so that it wasn't on these recordings, but I'm going to expire this API key anyway, so it doesn't actually happen. So just copy and paste these instead. You guys are going to cost me pennies in mail sending for the next hour that you send out, so just keep that in mind. Just kidding. That's it. It's very easy to actually send out email. I do encourage you, if you want to send real email, like sign up for a Mandrill account. It's a super simple service. It's very cheap. I don't know what we pay at Intuitive monthly for Mandrill, but it's in the dollars maybe. Okay, so yeah, we send thousands and thousands upon emails, and we pay very little money. I have no idea how. It's made by MailChimp, and MailChimp makes lots of money in there. So it's a cool service. Sign up for it. Very cheap. Okay, so now if we do this, I'm going to be smarter about this, and I'm going to make a new user that has my email address. I'll use my Gmail. So create a user that has your email address. And, oh, actually, sorry, you're going to need to restart your console after having done that change. So user mailer dot, what did we call it? Newsletter email, passing the user dot deliver. Guess I should open up my Gmail. Okay, so when I send this, I used user mailer. So notice that this is taking longer. I don't know if you guys saw it at all, and do it on your own. It takes longer than when we didn't have those SMTP settings in there, and that's because it's actually going out to Mandrill and saying send this email to this guy. So this is what I was saying about it takes in the order of seconds to send a real email to people, and if you were ever doing that within the context of someone's web request, i.e. registering for your site or anything like that, you would not want them to have to wait those extra seconds to send the email. And if you were an administrator sending an email to thousands of people at the click of a button, you would not want it to take thousands of seconds in order to do that. So we're going to get into that a little bit later, but did everyone get an email? I haven't yet. Let's give it a second. Pretty sure I got everything set up. I think that password would be fine. I don't know if it would fail. If not, you got one? Okay, maybe it's just trickling in. It's definitely good work. Worked when I sent it last time. Oh, the other thing though is that it could actually go into your spam because we're not like a real authenticated person yet. Depending on what mail client you're using, it might actually think that it's spam. Especially if you just put in like some random, from address here that doesn't mean anything. I'm going to actually change this one to be the same as the person. That might make it less spammy. Same as the person that I'm sending it to. Let's try that one out. Let me just log in here. Oh. I do not have a Mandrill password for my personal one because I think I did that at home. So, are you the only one who got an email? No one else got an email? That is kind of weird. Okay, well, we'll keep going on and we can look into that afterwards. I'm not sure why that wouldn't send. Because I'm pretty sure that we have everything the way it is supposed to be. So we'll take a look at that afterwards and see maybe why that didn't work. It certainly worked when I did it last night at home. Yours worked? Maybe Mandrill's slow. Maybe they're trickling in. I don't know. We'll leave it for a bit and we'll see. Yours worked right away? Yours worked right away. Okay. Well, we'll get it figured out for everyone else. But we'll keep going on with the notes. Oh, and sorry for anyone who's on Windows. Nobody here is, but I just don't know if that'll work on Windows either. Just like with the whole TLS authentication thing to Mandrill, I don't know how that works. Okay, so we're going to do an example of actually sending this newsletter, imagining that you're an administrator of blah, 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 blah. So you're probably Bob. And you're going to send a newsletter to all of the subscribers in your system. So let's make a controller called newsletters controller. And I'm nesting this under a namespace called admin. This is merely just for organizational purposes. You might find you have different sections of your website that are kind of self-contained, like an administrative interface, and you might want a namespace in that time. So it's certainly not necessary, but just to illustrate a concept that you can put in your app. And you'll notice actually that when we did that, it's made this, if we go into our routes file, it's actually made this whole namespace declaration inside here. We're actually just going to instead do one of them and just call it, just do the resource, which will do both of those, show and create. So the basic idea here is that as an administrator, when I go to the newsletter page, I'll, yeah. What version are... You're on Rails 4.0. Okay. It's maybe just that they've made things. You can use exactly what I'm using here in Rails 4.0 too. Not a difference. They might have just modified their generators to be a little bit smarter in Rails 4.1. No, that's the name of your application. So just do the namespacing stuff. Yeah, it's a good question. So generally, namespacing is just a method of organization, and that can be from like the classes that you define, that perspective, or from if you build a gem, for instance. Anytime you have these types of constants, for instance, a user mailer, this constant, if I were to write a gem and make a class called user mailer, is it's called like a global variable, basically. And so if anyone else in the world also made a gem and had a class called user mailer, they would clash because they're the exact same class. So typically what you do as a gem developer is you'd actually namespace all of your classes to be under, name of gem, : so I'll just show you what a namespace one looks like. So you might do something like name of gem, : class name. And that namespace, it just provides a means of having less naming clashes. And it's kind of a way of organizing your code in such a way that you can understand it hopefully a bit better. So in this case, if you were building out your blog posts, and you might have a newsletters controller that's for users of your system to subscribe to it, but then that controller shouldn't necessarily be responsible for also sending the emails from an admin perspective. So instead of having one newsletters controller that does all of this stuff, we can have like a user-based newsletter controller that lets them subscribe to the newsletter. And then we can have an admin-based newsletter controller that does more administrative functions. There's nothing in the naming of it. It's, as I say, it's just a way of separating these two ideas into different files so that you can just maintain better organization of your code.
Can you call that class newsletter controller?
At all times, unless I happen to be in a module that is also nested under admin, at all times I would have to reference admin : whatever. So this newsletters controller is not a global variable. It's not a global. It's not a class that is accessible in a global context. It is only accessible under this admin namespace. So yeah, it's really more for. I mean, I keep saying the word organization, and maybe that's confusing, but it's just a way of you grouping like things together. So as I say, like a gem author, pretty much all of their files are like things because they're part of a package that they're offering you, and so they would namespace them all under, name of gem : whatever. That way, if they happen to have a class called person or user, their user is not clashing with your user, and that would be a big problem if it were, because you'd both be defining stuff on it and would have all sorts of crazy results. Because I don't know if you knew this in Ruby, if you define a class, I'll show you a little example here. So if we just go into IRB and I define class X, and I do my blah method, so I can say x.new.blah, right? So what do you think happens if I do class X again? Is it going to overwrite it, or is it going to add to it? Any guesses? Right, so there's sort of two options. It could either completely overwrite the previous definition, or it could add to the previous definition. Overwrite? Everyone votes overwrite? So if you vote overwrite, then I shouldn't be able to say blah, right? Because if our second definition should totally override it, oh shit. So this is a thing called open classes. Ruby has a concept called open class, where every time you define a class, you are not overriding the previous definition, you are merely adding to it. So you can imagine how messed up that would be if two people happen to define a user class, and maybe they're from gems, two different sources, and they both get brought into your application, and that user class might have a method called email on it, but they have two different definitions of it, and you're like, why am I getting these different results? And the thing that wins out is the thing that's loaded last. So if I once again say class X and I do def blah, and instead of I put something else, and I say x.new.blah, I'm going to get something else this time, because technically this class is like the last loaded one. You don't have control over like load order generally in the Rails app, and like when things get defined. Nor do you really want to have to worry about these kind of naming clashes, and that's why you would namespace things. It doesn't. I mean, from your controller perspective, you're not ever going to have that problem because you're not necessarily, unless you were, releasing your gem as a blogging gem. But you wouldn't call it admin, you'd probably call it like my gem's name or something. So in your Rails app, in that context, for me, it's just more a way of grouping things. Instead of having an app controllers folder with, in our application at Influitive, we probably have 200 or 300 controllers. That would be a very long list, right? But we have split it up into maybe 7 or 8 different namespaces, depending on what section of the app you're in, and it's just more manageable and it's more obvious when you look at a user's controller, if it's nested under the admin namespace or if it's nested under the advocate namespace or whatever, sort of what it's doing. Yeah, the other way that you can do this, so this namespace is also known as a module, is like this. this is the same thing. So you might see modules sometimes as well. So modules are basically used for namespacing your code, and they have other properties on them as well, other abilities to them, but we're not really going to get into that too much. So that's really up to you. I actually prefer this syntax. I think it's more explicit, and I like that. Some people prefer the terseness of this. There are other advantages to this, but we won't worry about that. Do whatever you want. It's not going to affect you too much. Maybe for simple apps, you don't even worry about namespacing. So I thought I'd mention it as a concept. So when you namespace a controller, you also want to namespace it inside of your routes for things to align properly. And now when you run rake routes, you'll notice that our view is actually nested under admin. So your URLs will also be changed from that as well. And that's a Rails specific thing. Namespacing in general doesn't necessarily mean that your routes are different, but this is a very Rails specific. Okay, so inside of our newsletter controller, we're going to have a show view. So that's really just going to say you know, send out newsletter. And in here, we're probably just going to link to send now. And we're going to put in that route, this admin newsletter path. And what is the last thing I need on here if we look at this rake routes here? If I'm going to this, if I want to have this link. Yeah, so by default, all links are gets. We actually want this to be a post, right? Because this is sort of like a create. We're actually affecting the change here in a sense. So we're going to say method and post. And we can load that up. I don't have a server running yet. But if I go to admin newsletter, this is my super sweet interface that will allow us to send out this message. And if we inspect on that link, it should have a data method of post. So when we click it, it will actually post to the create action of our newsletter controller. And in this create action, we are going to actually send out our mail. So let's get users. I'm just going to say user.all. So these will be the users that we end up passing into the mailer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over those, all of those users and send an email to each one of those users. So it'll be users.each. Does anyone remember what this do end thing is called? A block. This is a Ruby block. In the each method, all it does is it iterates over anything that's enumerable, such as an array. And for each pass of that array, it assigns the particular index of that. So it starts at 0, goes to 1, all that kind of thing. Assigns one of them into this user local variable. So we have a user in here. We're just going to call user mailer dot, can't remember what I called it, newsletter email. And I'm going to pass in the user, and I'm going to call .deliver. And then I'm going to say emails sent. And sorry, I'm going to modify one thing in our I'm just going to do this so that we get that flash notice. And in here, all I'm going to do is redirect back to the admin newsletter path. Okay. Redirect to. Good call. not even following my notes at this point. Let's hope that I'm doing it right. Looks pretty good. Yeah, don't put like someone that you. You're actually sending emails at this point. Oh, hopefully, anyway. Although mine never seemed to. I never actually received anything. Yours went through. Some people's have gone through. Apparently, my system does not like to send me emails. I honestly don't know why that's not happening for some people. I don't know. I just tested this out last night and it totally worked. Let me just see if I typed in. Oh, I did put a note in my notes there saying if you didn't receive an email, double check the email address. This happens. This has happened to me so many times where you think, oh yeah, I sent myself an email, and it ends up that you just got the wrong email address, and then you feel kind of like a dummy when that happens. So. Just going to grab the emails. Bradley Robertson at gmail.com. Maybe I'll try sending it to a different one. Okay, so from our controller example anyway, right now we're sending it to all users in our system. Can anyone suggest how you might limit that? So if you wanted to allow people to subscribe to your newsletter, what would you do? Sure. Perfect. Yeah. So you'd probably have, you can add it onto the user. You might even have, like if you have a bunch of different emails, you might actually have like an email preference model that a user is associated to. And then it could have, you know, like receive, I mean, it can, mail config can be a crazy array if you've ever looked at Facebook or Twitter on the things you can be notified of. If your system just has one email, you'd probably just keep it on the user model and say like, yes or no, I want to receive this, and then they can choose whether or not they'd want to do that in the interface. So let's test this out. I'm sending an email. It says email sent. Hey, and this one worked. I don't know why it didn't. The other one did not work, but this one actually worked for me. So, blah 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 blog has my posts in it, and I guess Tobias at funke.com is going to receive one too, and perhaps my work one is also going to receive one. Let's see. Yep. Blah 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 blah. So I don't know why that didn't work for me before. Did this actually work for people this time? Oh, great. Well, anyway, it worked for me. So that's cool. Did anyone notice? So if you have a bunch of users in your system, it actually might have taken a little while for that to happen. That's that whole for each user in the system. It takes a few seconds to send out. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. But do you guys want to take a break right now and learn backgrounding jobs afterwards? It's really quick, the background job thing. So it won't take long at all. Or we could do it now if you just want to plow through it. It's up to you. We've got 3 votes for plow. Don't care. All right, that's the majority, I'd say, at this point. So let's just plow through it. It's honestly, it'll take 10 minutes. So the next step in making this a little bit better, and as I say, this is going to be relevant for anyone who wants to do any kind of data processing outside of the context of a person's normal requests. So if you were doing a CSV upload and parsing a whole bunch of data, if you were writing a dating service and you wanted to match people up, you'd probably do, this would be like a background job that you would do, and you'd find out all their interests and make the matches. You would use basically what's called a background worker. So there's lots of gems that can do this for you. I'm going to just show you the Sucker Punch gem because it's the easiest one to do and it's the easiest one to set up, and you don't need to run any other processes. In a more sort of high volume production like setup, you'd probably use a gem called Sidekick is the most popular one. But it actually means that alongside of your Rails server, you need to run a Sidekick server. And then it is this other process that as the Rails server makes the job, it then pulls the job off and pushes it out. But it's more complicated than, you probably don't need to worry about that too much. So instead, we're just going to use the Sucker Punch gem, which was inspired by Sidekick anyway. That's a good gem. So we'll bundle install. And we will get Sucker Punch. And all of our jobs are going to live in a new folder that we don't have yet called app jobs. So create a new folder, jobs. And I'm just going to, there's no fancy generator for this one, so we're just going to make our own class. And I'm just going to call this one newsletter job. And then just remember that your file name needs to match an underscored version of the class name. So we are going to include, which I don't know if we've done yet, we're including a module into our class. This is the other thing modules can be used for, is you can write a module that provides methods, and then you can include them into other classes. It's almost like another form of inheritance where you can provide implementation to classes that derive from you. But it's actually called a mix-in because you can mix multiple modules into a class, but you can only inherit from one class. So it's more flexible than inheritance. If that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. Just include the Sucker Punch job. And then we're just going to define a perform method. This is an instance method. It's going to take the array of users. It's going to do basically the job of that controller. So it's going to take the array of users and just deliver, do the exactly what we were doing before. So now we would take this out of our controller. So let's close the other files, and we'll go into our newsletter controller. So instead of this here, we can say newsletter job. Now, we're going to instantiate a new instance of it, and we're going to call this method called async.perform. And this async method is provided to you by this module that we included. So include Sucker Punch job. It actually adds this would look something like this. And it would have a def async on it. So when you include it into here, it's going to be like do some cool background stuff. It's going to have the implementation of it, but that's basically how a module works. You define a module with a def in it, and then you can share that functionality amongst other classes. So something to think about if you're trying to share behavior amongst the classes in your app. So we have newsletter job. We call new.async.perform. Again, or do I already have it going? Oh yeah, I had it going earlier. And if we go back to our newsletter class and we click send, I don't know if you noticed, but it was significantly faster in the response to the user. So previously when I did that, I had to send out 3 emails to all the users in the system. That took roughly 3 seconds per, so it took almost 10 seconds for that request to go through. I can actually illustrate that. We can even time this. I don't know if you guys have ever used the you've ever sort of played around with the recording of requests. So let's watch what happens here. I'm going to take the async out of here. So I'm just going to call new.perform, and we're going to submit this thing. So I'm going to post it, and we're going to see that. I didn't record it. Damn it, I turned off recording. Sorry. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to receive a lot of emails. So I'm going to click send. Notice that it's posting, and it's going to respond roughly there. So here's our 302 post, and the time that it took to send was 8 seconds. It's pretty shitty, right? That's not a very good user experience. But if I add in this async here, and we run it again, when I click send, whoa, that was 52 milliseconds. Significant difference, right? But it still sends out the emails. It's just what happens is, if you look at your logs, you'll still see these emails being sent out. They just don't happen at the same time as that request. It's like, it says do this later, and then Ruby does it later, if that makes sense. And I mean, you'll notice that we probably have a ton of emails now that we don't really care about, but that's how a background job works. That's it. That was simple, right? I was serious when I said it was a very simple example. What? That's a very good question. Yeah. So in this case, this background monitor actually is only running one job at a time. So it's very likely, because we passed in the users in a particular order, it's going to queue one job, and that background thing will pull it off pretty much synchronously. But you can actually tell the thing run 20 of these at a time. So it would queue them all up, but then you'd have 20 workers working at any one time, and at that point the order is random. You have no idea. And that's actually it can cause real problems in your system. So if you have, this is called multi-threading, if you have multiple threads operating on code at the same time, you can get into these really weird order issues. In the case of sending emails, it doesn't really matter. But if you were actually, for instance, like calculating stuff and writing to the database, you can have examples where you have non-thread safe code where two things try to access something at the same time, or do like a mutually exclusive update on something and it just fails. That is a well-known problem in computer science. It's very hard to deal with. But for our case of sending emails, it doesn't really matter. And also in this case, it's just using one thread anyway. It's one separate thread from the main line that is processing your web requests. But if you read through the Sucker Punch documentation, you can actually tell it. And you probably would do this if you're sending an email out to thousands of users. You could tell it to use like 20 threads. And so like churn through a ton of them at once, roughly. There are limitations to that, but in this case, we only have one job. Yeah, so they are going to happen in the order that I passed them in. But if you were to queue up multiple jobs, they can happen in this kind of. Well, so there's a few different things to consider too. You've got web workers, which are serving web requests, and then you have background workers that are doing things like Sidekick jobs and stuff like that. The thing about the Sucker Punch gem is it does both of those things in the one worker. So that's why you don't have to pay extra for it. That's what's sort of nice. If you were on Heroku and you were using something, for instance, like Sidekick, you could actually, spin up a bunch of Sidekick workers. And you could have those jobs all churning, again, essentially at a random order that you can't guarantee. It just pulls them off a queue at whatever rate it can. But the nice thing about the Sucker Punch gem is that you don't actually need to spin up a separate worker, and that's when you have to start paying for Heroku, is once you have more than one unit of code kind of running. So Sucker Punch just allows you to do that, but for free. Yeah, because if you had a single job that was sending to 1,000 users, then you have one long-running job, and you can't use multiple threads to do it. Yeah, so I mean, in this case, it is a single job and it's not a big deal, but you might, Enrica's right, you might queue up one job per user and then have 20 threads operate on them at the same time and send them out whatever order you want. Oh, I mean, you could look at it that way too. So it's not like it's a crazy mission critical needs to happen super fast, so you don't need to. Yeah, the main purpose of this isn't so much for sending it to the people fast enough. It's for responding to the person who actually clicked on the I want to send this newsletter. That's the main purpose of this. So yeah, you're right. It's not like it's a super unique, crazy performance. That's it. That's the lesson. Wow, that was quick. Good thing we didn't take a break and then have a 5-minute lesson. So let's take a break now, and then the rest of the day you guys can just work on your apps, and we'll help you out. Over and out on the broadcast.